Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Build Insights video. Today we'll be taking a look at the build-out for the Stadium and Odeum of Domitian in Rome. Both of these structures were built under the 1st century emperor known as Domitian, and together they make up the 9th and 10th subsections of Phase 3 in my years-long effort to recreate all of ancient Rome, circa mid-4th century CE. These subsections consist of roughly 10,800 bricks, bringing the running total for the entire SPQR diorama to about 279,000. It connects directly to the Pantheon and the Baths of Agrippa featured in the previous video, and continues our exploration of the Campus Martius area of Rome. A quick shout out to all my members over on Patreon who help to support my work. These projects take many months to realize, and patrons get to see every step along the way, like the digital design insights for the Stadium and Odeum of Domitian, which were shared all the way back in February 2025. It's also worth mentioning I don't do ad reads or any sponsored content despite near constant requests, so if you find my work to be valuable and you'd like to return some of that value by becoming a member on Patreon, you'll find a link in the description. We're starting off with the rectangular enclosure known as the Porticus Boni Eventi. This quadriporticus was located next to the Baths of Agrippa, which we explored previously, and it's named after Bonus Eventus, the agricultural god of good outcomes. Like that name implies, this complex is a bit of a bonus round when it comes to reconstructions of 4th century Rome. It's fairly clear that the site was originally the location of the Stagnum Agrippae. Also known as the Pool of Agrippa, this large rectangular pool doubled as both a reservoir and as a nomachia for the occasional mock naval battle. But after the fire of 80 CE, which destroyed much of the Campus Martius, the site was likely transformed into a plaza enclosed by a large portico. At least, that's what we're left to assume from sparse architectural remains, including 5 Corinthian capitals of extraordinary size, which were found on the site during the 19th century excavations. This mention of Corinthian capitals, as well as columns of Cipollino marble, inspired me to reconstruct the columns of the portico with sand green bars, topped off by flower plates and universal joint centers for extra ornamentation. These joint centers were removed from the middle of these 3-piece Technic assemblies, then spray painted in metallic gold lacquer. Here in the assembled diorama, they act as ornamentation and as double-sided studs, connecting the inverted columns below to the right side up roof above. One of the fragments of the ancient marble plan of Rome, known as the Forma Urbis, attests to the presence of a small basin on the south end of the portico of Bonus Eventus. The Lacus Coniculi may well have been all that remained of the much larger Pool of Agrippa, which was destroyed in the fire of 80 CE. It's interesting to note that unlike the Baths of Agrippa that stood next door to this basin, the water here came not from the Aquavertical Aqueduct, but directly from the nearby Tiber River. The original Stagnum Agrippae, as well as this subsequent basin, were fed by an underground channel known as the Euripus. Partial remnants of this submerged channel to the Tiber can be seen today beneath Palazzo della Cancelleria as one of the stops in an exhibition on Leonardo da Vinci. The Temple of Bonus Eventus likely stood at the center of the surrounding portico. It would have been dedicated to Bonus Eventus, god of agriculture and of good outcomes, who was usually paired with Lympha, a goddess who influenced water supply. This correlation further supports the temple's location, given the site's previous function as a large reservoir. We also know of a restoration to the entire complex, which was carried out by the urban prefect known as Claudius Caesarius in 374 CE. The reconstruction of this particular temple was challenging for one very specific reason, and that would be its width of 6 studs. Typically, I'd use 1x2 slopes for the roof treatment of most temples, but temples 6 studs in width are not so easily divided in half with the existing slope bricks. So instead of slopes, I use these window shutter elements. They loosely sit in place with the clips at the corners, but that's not something I have time to worry about reapplying at every venue, so I just hot glued them to the bricks on the interior. The Odeum of Domitian once stood directly west of the Porticus Boni Eventi, as well as directly south of what we now know as Piazza Navona. Unlike the Roman theaters where stage dramas were acted out, odia were reserved for more niche performances such as singing recitals, poetry recitation, and musical performances. They were also notably smaller than theaters and often further distinguished by the presence of a permanent roof rather than a retractable velarium. Even though it was smaller than most theaters, the Odeum of Domitian in Rome was still larger than most Roman theaters found in the provinces. The site of the Odeum has never been fully excavated, so we're left to reconstruct the full structure based solely on the foundations of the back wall. Despite the fact the Odeum of Domitian was said to have been much smaller than the nearby theater of Pompey, the structural scheme is essentially the same for both reconstructions. But since poetry and music were less spectacular than gladiator fights and theatrical performances, the Odeum was likely only large enough to accommodate 7,000 spectators. There is virtually no evidence describing the roof or awning of the Odeum of Domitian. When it comes to important details like this, I usually consult better preserved or more well-documented instances of the same building type elsewhere in the Roman world. This reconstruction of the ancient theater and Odeum in Catania, a city in Sicilia, helped to inform my solution for the timber roof, which might have covered the Odeum of Domitian in Rome. It's important to remember that absence of evidence should never be considered evidence of absence. It's certainly no stretch to imagine that the Romans would have gone to great lengths to embellish each and every venue in the capital city. Plus, we already know of other long-span timber roof structures such as the Diribatorium, which we explored in a previous video. And more to the point, this single column of Cipollino marble standing just south of Piazza Navona is the solitary visible evidence for the existence of the Odeum on the streets of Rome today. More than anyone else since the emperors of antiquity, Gian Lorenzo Bernini left his mark on the city of Rome with an unassailable volume of architectural, sculptural, and urban development projects, including the design of the Fontana dei Quattro Fiumi at the center of Piazza Navona. But much of the foundations on which Bernini and his contemporaries built were put down by the emperors of Rome. One such emperor, Domitian, was himself responsible for the shape of Piazza Navona. Domitian built a stadium on the site in the late 1st century CE, alongside countless other projects to restore the grandeur of the Campus Martius in the aftermath of the fire of 80 CE. To this day, the cobblestone pavement of Piazza Navona sits just a few meters above the gravel terrain on which athletes once competed in quadrennial games in the Greek tradition. The buildings which encircle the piazza were built atop the cavea of this ancient stadium, and these partially excavated foundations are accessible today at Stadio di Domiziano. The primary location of these ruins is actually along the Sfendoni, or curved semicircular end of the stadium. Here you can also see a model of the stadium crafted by Italo Gismondi, beneath one of the arches of the ancient structure. My reconstruction of the Stadium of Domitian features a brick that hasn't been seen in a set since 1998. Element 6044 is a 3-4-5 triangle with studs along the hypotenuse. This angle is perfect for recreating the cavea with printed tiles and connecting these directly to the double arcade along the exterior. You'll find these bricks in stock and in plenty of colors over at Go Bricks. Each of these triangles made up a single slice of the stadium design, then 86 slices were combined to form the entire perimeter. With 5 slices to a section, each were connected to the base by 2 studs and directly attached to adjacent sections. On top of that, clips along the cavea were used for additional reinforcement, where bars and flex tubes tie it all together along the surface of the cavea. The Odeum and the Stadium of Domitian both accommodated the Agoni Capitolini, a series of athletic competitions held every 4 years in honor of Jupiter. These competitions were based on the Greek model we use today for the quadrennial Olympic Games. The feats of athleticism were not the only Greek precedent at play, as the design of the stadium itself was also based on Greek designs. But this decidedly Roman version was not excavated along a hillside slope used for seating like most Greek versions. Instead, it was built of solid masonry stacked several levels up from the ground. In fact, the Stadium of Domitian was likely the only example of a masonry athletic stadium outside the Greek world. The south end of the stadium featured a flat arcade facing the Odeum and was pitched to about 4 degrees off-axis. The interior of this arcade may have housed extra seating, and these details were inspired by Jean-Claude Gauvin's watercolor rendering of the overall site. I hope you enjoyed these insights into the Stadium and Odeum of Domitian. If you'd like to see even more behind-the-scenes insights, you can check out the exclusive posts over on my Patreon. Aside from supporting my work, Patreon membership also gets you early access to all these insights videos. Be sure to stay tuned for the next video, where we'll be taking a look at the 3rd century complex known as the Baths of Alexander Severus. In the meantime, thanks for following along, and I'll see you in the next one.